If you've ever been to Mexico City, the altitude can be quite unsettling if you're not used to the thinner air, particularly if jet lag is involved. Although the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes seemed to cope quite nicely, Ferrari toiled during the Mexico City Grand Prix and was nowhere near challenging its rival frontrunners in a race where Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc were a distant 5th and 6th. The nature of the Mexico City Grand Prix circuit and altitude made Ferrari's F175 car very difficult to drive according to Sainz, and there seems to be a cocktail of reasons behind its underperformance. Relative to the Red Bull and Mercedes cars, Ferrari came off third best during qualifying at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. Sainz could only claim 5th for Sunday's grid, and Leclerc struggled and qualified 7th behind Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas. In particular, the Ferrari seemed to struggle in the high-speed S's, and there were instances where the drivers had to course correct to overcome the low grip conditions. Sainz conceded that the conditions had not particularly suited the F175, but hoped that it would be nothing more than a one-off, and felt that there was more performance in the car that was left untapped. There was probably a bit more out here, but the car has been difficult to drive, Sainz explained after qualifying. And normally when it's difficult to put laps together like we did in Austin. I think we've lost quite a bit of performance in high altitude. When asked how the altitude was specifically affecting the car, Sainz felt that Ferrari's powertrain was not quite as potent at dealing with the air density drop of 22%. Since Mexico City is 2.25 kilometers above sea level, this means that the air is considerably thinner compared to a zero altitude environment. With reduced density, this means that the cars don't have as much drag, and thus the teams can tack on their maximum downforce packages. But team principal Mattia Binotto explained that Ferrari actually tried to dial back the downforce levels to get a little bit more out of the straights, but the car was too leery to countenance that switch. Binotto also suggested that the turbocharger had a small part to play, and that Ferrari's powertrain wasn't quite as efficient as its rivals and couldn't run at maximum power. The other effects of the high altitude chiefly involve the powertrain. The cooling vents around the grid have been opened up to their maximum, owing to the reduced mass flow rate of air through the system, to ensure that the internals don't overheat. Furthermore, the turbocharger must work harder to compress the air before reaching the internal combustion engine to address the overall deficit. Back in the late 1980s, the turbo cars had a distinct advantage over the normally aspirated contingent at Mexico, thanks to the ability to compress air for combustion. In fact, during the 1988 Mexican Grand Prix, the best placed normally aspirated car on the grid was Benetton's Alessandro Nannini in 8th, but he was 3 seconds slower than Ayrton Senna's turbocharged McLaren Honda on pole. The non-turbo cars lost about 20% of their power due to that thinner air. So if Ferrari's turbo isn't as efficient in Mexico as its rivals' designs, then this means that there could be a power loss attributed to the compression of air that's not experienced as much in regular atmospheric conditions. Binotto says that the powertrain wasn't the biggest factor, however, stating, "There's certainly more than that, and there's something that we need to look at, and there's not a clear answer right now. So the ride was not great, and the balance wasn't great." He likened Ferrari's struggle to that in Spa, where it was distinctly second best to Red Bull on track. There he added that the overall aero efficiency was one of the mitigating factors behind Ferrari's comparative lack of pace, and it appears that the team's inability to trim any downforce off for Mexico could lay some of the problems bare, even in the low density air. Sainz also explained that Ferrari was struggling to switch the tyres on, and left him feeling that coaxing the car through the S's was a fight. "We knew before coming here that we were going to need to take some compromises," Sainz said, and then tyres and the car over curbs and bumps was just difficult to drive. "It was a fight through the S's, that's why I couldn't put a lap together in qualifying." Leclerc agreed that Ferrari's performance in Mexico would be a one-off, and it seems that a perfect storm of unfavourable conditions left the Scuderia as the third best team. Although Sao Paulo's Interlagos circuit, next up, is another race at altitude, it's nowhere near the magnitude of Mexico City's closeness to the sky, and density will only be 9% lower than that at sea level compared to Mexico's 22%. And Interlagos is a smaller venue with lower speed sections too, and thus should be much more to Ferrari's liking relative to the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. It should, at the very least, be a little bit easier for the engines to breathe.